All right, and could you tell me your name?
Willie Jenkins.
All right, and where are you from?
From Bryson City in the western part of North Carolina, but people would know of Cherokee, which was close by.
All right, and what was your family like growing up?
Well, we was raised poor, but everybody in the community was. Everybody chipped in and did work that was, that actually provided the food for us and what limited income that we had.
Okay. And do you remember, was it your grandfather that I heard was into moonshining?
My grandfather was pretty well known as the best moonshiner in Western Carolina.
All right. What age do you remember first being aware that they were doing anything regarding moonshining or anything?
5 or 6 years old.
5 or 6 years old. And you say, you were telling me, why is it called moonshining again?
Well, there might be different terminology from different places, but there it was referred to as moonshine because it was distilled at the nighttime because you had to cook the mash and the smoke could be detected direct somebody running into you if you didn't. So it was distilled at night, so in the light of the moon, so that's why it was referred to as moonshine.
And what is the difference between moonshining and bootlegging?
Well, it's pretty simple, actually. A moonshining is actually the making of the liquor. Bootlegging is the selling of that product after it has been distilled.
So some people were only the sellers.
You did, but for the most part, it was the bootlegger or the moonshiner actually sold. Now, he may sell in larger amounts and somebody else will break it down to smaller amounts. Mm-hmm. For example, a gallon of liquor would bring between $8 and $16 in those days. Wow. The smaller the amount, if it was sold by the pint, it was usually $2 a pint. It was normally $10 a gallon for liquor, but if someone bought a large amount, it would be discounted to $8 a gallon.
How old were you when you first tasted moonshine?
5 or 6 years old.
Wow. And you said there's a difference in how it's made today as it was back in the day.
It is, and still there's probably more of a limited number of moonshiners today, but if you see on the Disney Channel where they've got a show called Moonshiners, most of them actually cook the mash by using propane gas. Well, we didn't have that then, and so all of the liquor, the mash that was cooked, was done by wood, and my grandfather would only use hickory wood or oak for the flavor.
Because it helped, it changed the flavor.
The how it's cooked. Water is a key ingredient. You have to have very, very clean water to make good liquor.
And sugar and stuff, it's molasses.
Well, yes. As a general rule, we would always look at that 10 pounds of sugar would normally generate about 1 gallon of liquor.
That's a lot of sugar for a gallon.
Well, yes, and a large run would be 10 gallons. So they used to sell sugar in 50-pound bags.
Did they stop doing that because they got caught onto the fact that people were using it for liquor?
Yes.
Why would you need that much sugar?
Exactly. When they was trying to crack down and find out who was moonshining, actually the revenuers, as we call them, would go by, and enforce that if anyone bought a larger amount than 20 pounds of sugar, they had to register it. They had to get the person's name and everything.
That's crazy.
And they would come by, and if they saw a history of somebody who's buying 100 pounds of sugar every week, they knew something.
Red flag. So that throws up in there where you'd have to probably get more people aware of it and pay people to buy sugar for you, huh?
Well, or you had a cooperative agreement with the store owner.
That sounds good.
You would use fictitious names.
Oh,
Got to be traced.
That's cool. And you say, it's not legal, so you wouldn't have it near your house. Where would you regularly have?
Well, the location was very key. It had to be a very secluded area where hopefully nobody would find it.
Would it need to be near running water?
It had to be. Had to be. But branch water that's running was not acceptable to my grandpa. He would always go to the head where a spring would come out, at the head of the spring, and he would take that spring and open it up, form a pond to get the water that he needed. Because the water is very key in the taste of moonshine.
And you say you wouldn't do it on your own property.
Oh gosh, no! I mean, that would if they found it.
Yeah, so
would be convicted. So usually it would be a half a mile minimum, but most cases it was at least a mile from your home, and it
on
was-
someone else's property.
oh, someone else's property. Yeah.
All right. And why is it mainly done in Appalachia?
You know, it's a history of that. It's number one is that you got to cover the mountains where you can hide, distilling of the liquor. That's easier. It's also is that the people that's kind of unique. They're different from almost anyone you would ever meet. Now that could extend into Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia, and of course North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
But Bronson City was actually regarded as the heart of the Smoky Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of moonshining in that area and around in Robbinsville, which is nearby, Hayesville, Andrews, and so forth. But I would say Bronson had as many moonshiners as any
As
city
anywhere.
that I've known.
Now, as far as the customers, people that bought the moonshine, what all different walks of life do you remember them being from?
I remember well, I guess the interesting thing is that someone would typically think of a moonshine buyer as an alcoholic and so forth, that really,
A bum or
yeah,
something?
but that was not always the case. In fact, there was 3 examples I could give you. One of the largest property owners and who also ran the community store bought liquor, and he liked his cold. He would keep it in a cooler where they would sell soft drinks out of. But people would think it was his water for lunch and so forth, and nobody ever thought anything different about it. A second person that was very interesting was the head of the bank, the
Wow.
bank president, who was a very wealthy man, liked to taste of moonshine, and he bought from my grandpa exclusively. I don't think he ever bought from anyone else. But maybe the most interesting one was the sheriff.
Oh my goodness! What?
Well, it was kind of interesting. The sheriff also, on the side, he owned a motel. That area has been, a tourist attraction for many, many years because of the rivers, streams, and so forth, and the mountains that's in it. Well, he would buy it, and then he would sell it to the people that rented from his properties as a souvenir. And so he was probably making on an average of $32 for a gallon that he sold, broken down in small amounts, and he was paying $8.
A gallon.
But
Wow.
there was a cooperation going there. Anytime that it was reported that someone was making liquor, the what we call the revenuers, that's the alcohol, folks, and they were stationed in Asheville, would call the sheriff's office and say, "We need your help. We're coming down. We're going to be looking for a steal in this community." Well, when that happened, the sheriff would come to my grandpa immediately and said, "You need to clear out. You need to make it where you're not around in case they find it." He's not going to lead them to it.
Yeah.
He didn't even know where it was at,
Yeah.
but they could find it. And so on that
Give him a
cooperation,
heads up.
he was tried one time in court, but he was found guilty through interesting story, but he was never convicted.
He was never
And
convicted.
he did it for probably at least 40 years.
Wow. Well, I'd say he had a lot of connections, being that he was in good company with the sheriff and the man who owned the store. I mean, if you got the sheriff on your side, you basically do have the law on your side.
And the sheriff was the most important elected position in the county in those days, and probably still is. They've got a lot of power. And,
Yeah.
So yes, but it was good to have the sheriff on your side.
I'm sure. And what are how much money would you think would be made?
Typically a week, you would gross, about $100, and then you would have into that probably about $20 to $25 of the material that made the liquor.
And back then, people that don't moonshine, that just worked and did whatever they could, what would you think that they would make a week in comparison?
Well, a big, the normal wage for at the most was $1 per hour.
Okay.
And there was not a whole lot of opportunities. In a community I lived on, there was only 2 people had public jobs. The other people made money by farming, and also they would cut wood, either pulpwood, logs, or stakes, which is for fence posts, and you use locust trees for that. And sometimes you bust a locust to make it where it would support a fence. But it would sell. And in those days, a steak usually sold for 20 cents. And I'm telling you, I've done that. It was a hard day if you came up with 20 steaks that you had cut, bought in, and busted up.
I'm sure.
And this was by far the most lucrative
thing you could do.
Work you could do, but there was a risk that went with it. I mean, you could spend a lot of time in prison if you was caught.
Do you remember any women bootleggers?
No, I do not.
No.
My grandfather's, my grandmother, she knew what was happening, and she would actually, well, when you say that, she knew where some was always hidden, and if he was not there, she would occasionally sell to someone that she knew well.
But she didn't ever sip it herself?
Yes, she probably has sipped a little bit of herself, but it was for medical purposes.
Yeah.
Liquor was good for anything that ailed you.
I'm sure. My great-grandmother actually did snuff, I heard. Did your grandmother ever, dip snuff or anything like that?
I knew women in the area that did, but my grandmother never touched alcohol in her life, and yet she died.
No, did she dip snuff like tobacco?
No,
she didn't.
She did not, but I know others that did.
Yeah, that's a trip. And I'm sure I've heard rumors of how dangerous bootlegging is and moonshining.
Well, yes, there's always the risk, but probably the largest risk would be arrested and going to prison. There's times that people would steal, moonshine. They would find it, watch out where you hid it, and then take it. Justice could have been pretty bad at that time.
Yeah.
And,
they weren't going to get sent you to court because it's illegal.
No, you're not taking the person to court, but, that person would probably be hurt.
Yeah.
Bad if it was found out who actually took it.
And your grandfather, do you think that he continued moonshining up until that time when he passed?
He had gotten really sick, so I would say he had moonshine up until about 5 years before his death.
5 years before his death.
Yeah.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1949.
49. So this is probably in the 50s and early 50s and stuff like that.
Well, actually, it would have been where my involvement probably came in the most was probably in the year of 1965.
65.
That's when I got my driver's license. My brother went to service and he bought a car. And I was the perfect person to run the liquor because you didn't think of a 16-year-old as doing that. So it's not, how they
we're throwing up alarms, yeah.
And so I did that, a number of times. And as I said again, I have taken liquor to all 3 of those folks that I mentioned: the president, the sheriff, as well as the store.
So if you got caught speeding or anything, what do you think the sheriff would have done? Just kind of overlooked it, maybe?
Well,
he still had to do his job. But
the sheriff would have.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee he would have been the sheriff that
Yeah.
caught you. Even then, we had highway patrol.
Okay.
But, the liquor would have been in the trunk, so it would not have been visible if you stopped it, unless, they had a reason to search your vehicle. That just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. That's amazing.
It was interesting lifestyle.
I'm sure it was. I bet you'll never forget things that you
I won't.
saw back then.
I won't. I still know where, I think I could still find a worm. And, a worm is basically a coiled copper tubing where when the whiskey is cooked or the mash is cooked, and it goes through the thumper, and it goes through the worm in a kind of a motion, and that turns it in as it cools down from vapor to liquid, and that's when it comes out as moonshine. But that was critical to have the cocker, because you're not going to get lead poisoning or anything from that.
Yeah.
But the last time he actually moonshined, we hid it in a hollow log, and I think I could go back to this day and find that. We still see places, where it was distilled.
Yeah.
Where the old furnaces was at.
That'd be cool to go get that, just to have it, as like a souvenir of your grandpa.
And at some point, I will probably do that.
That would be really cool. And even though, stuff like that was kind of, off the collar, stuff that was done, I bet people back then were really good people. I mean, they kept their word about stuff, and they were good people.
They were. And I would tell you that they were, in my opinion, they were honest. They did not see it as being a crime. They saw it as very, very hard work.
Yeah.
They just didn't like, the government telling them what they could and couldn't do. Basically the reason it's illegal is because they wouldn't get taxes on it. Exactly. I mean, that's the reason that it was made illegal. So folks didn't go for that in those Appalachian areas.
And back then, speaking of only 2 people had city jobs, and people just got jobs where they could. Even nowadays, the government makes it harder for you to be able to do stuff on the side. They want a quarter of every dollar you make. They want to know about it.
That's about correct.
So back then, it would have been easy for somebody to survive just doing odd and ends and stuff.
It was, and we, was poor in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways we were not. I mean, as I said again, before, I cannot afford to eat today as good as I did then. And their grocery bill was never more than $10 a month.
But you grew most of your stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. We had meat for every day and all kinds of vegetables and fruits, so it was, I look back upon it and didn't realize how good I really had it, and was eating healthy food.
Yeah. Because you have a lot of stuff in your refrigerator now, but you say it's not as half as healthy as it was back then.
Not as healthy, and nowhere near as good.
Yeah.
Nowhere near as good. Those fresh vegetables couldn't be beat, and then the meat was, usually fresh, because no one had a freezer. You had to smoke.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that.
Well,
it had to be fresh.
Yeah, the meat, we usually, for the pork, which is one of the main, meats that we usually butcher 2 hogs per year. You could salt it, that would keep it. You always would wait till about Thanksgiving till it cooled down enough to keep the meat. But then you could salt it, you could smoke it, and so forth, and it was always good. And then people always shared after they butchered the hog, the fresh meats. The backbones and tenderloins was always regarded as the choicest part, not the ham, as most people would think.
Backbones and the tenderloin.
Yeah. And then we had a lot of chickens. We had chicken for breakfast many times.
Wow.
Chicken was, we probably kept almost any time at least 500.
Wow.
We'd sell some eggs and so forth. And
500 chickens?
About at any time.
Were they were just free range?
Free range.
Yeah.
Well, you don't have to go out and hunt their nest and find the eggs and so forth, where they would lay. And sometimes they would share a nest, where they do. Find a nest, you might find 15 or 20 eggs in it.
That's amazing. So I'd say that you had a pretty interesting life. I don't think you'd trade it for anything.
I would not. There was you learned a lot of things. How to survive. Not too many people lives in the city today could probably go out and survive. Really.
No.
They couldn't go to the store.
No, they wouldn't know what to do.
But if someone was raised as the way I was, you could certainly make it.
That's amazing. All right. Well, thank you for doing the interview with me today. And I did learn a lot of interesting stuff about growing up back then and about your life that I probably would have never learned.
That is true. And, if you would like, to end it, I could give you a little swallow of genuine moonshine.
All right.
Would you like that?
Yeah, go make me a sip of it. I'll get it on camera. That is so cool. In a water bottle, huh?
Well,
Well, it wasn't legal
I
yet.
gotta have it where if somebody was,
Come in.
come in, they wouldn't. I don't think anybody was really.
No.
This right here is not going to think you know what it is. Now it will go down smooth, but it might have a little bit of a burn afterwards.
You're gonna be like rubbing alcohol.
Not exactly.
Oh, not bad. Not bad.